You're here because you want to know what makes a high fantasy story feel epic. My name's Adam Scott for RPG Club. Let's talk about that right now. The first thing to take a look at is that fantasy and epic, while they often go hand in hand, are actually two different descriptors of some of our favorite stories, like Lord of the Rings, the Stormlight Archive, The Wheel of Time, A Song of Ice and Fire. What makes them fantasy and what makes them epic? Because those are two different things. Fantasy, first off, refers to the setting. The characters in any story, they can live in a place that is either realistic or fantasy or somewhere in between. So that describes the place in which the story exists. Epic refers to the scope. The scope is what is the focus of the story. Now, Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite stories. And the reason for that is because it focuses on a world-changing, world-spanning event with the Dark Lords and the good little hobbits. It's a conflict between good and evil. The stakes of the story are very high, and they affect all of Middle-earth. The opposite of that is a personal story. Now, I don't care much for personal stories when I'm reading fantasy because I like the large world impacting conflicts. However, you might feel differently. If so, let me know below what you think and what you prefer. Now that we know that fantasy is a setting and epic is a scope, what are some things that storytellers do to make that scope feel truly epic? The first thing they do is they have expansive world building. I'm working my way through the Stormlight Archives, and I've got to say, while I have some issues with some of the characters, I keep coming back to it because the scope of the story is so big, I just want to learn more. The entire world is affected. And the characters that live in that world, there's really high stakes for the things that they do. There's massive city-states, there's a huge dynamic geographical political system, and all sorts of really interesting things happening beyond just the characters themselves. That's why I keep coming back to that story. Something similar could be said for The Wheel of Time or The Lord of the Rings. Following up on that idea of expansive world building, the conflict within the epic story that truly makes it feel epic is it's a grand conflict with really high stakes. The Wheel of Time and the Dark One, they go back thousands of years in the context of the story. This is not a story that takes place within one book or a 5-year period. This is a long-term story that plays out over, that's like why it's 15,000 pages long. It takes a while to tell that level of story, and that's why it feels epic, because the story goes back for many, many thousands of years beyond the scope of the novel. In A Song of Ice and Fire, there's all the political intrigue, and there's the even more important conflict of the Long Night and the White Walkers. There's this creeping feeling of evil and despondency and despair coming in that is also being set against this dynamic political conflict. And to me, that makes the scope of the story big and really interesting. And I think that's why a lot of people like epic fantasy, and that's one of the devices storytellers use to make that happen. I'm not sure which one your favorite is, but let me know if you have a certain type of story or a certain type of conflict that you really like and what kind of work that you find it in. To add to that, there's often heroes in these conflicts that have truly heroic destinies. Frodo, Randall Thor, Jon Snow, these characters really have some type of arc that is big. It is heroic. It is impactful. They're not just trying to solve a little bit of a problem. They might be seen almost in the context of the story as the world's savior, connecting back to some of the archetypes in Joseph Campbell's work about the hero's journey. One hero I keep coming back to is Kaladin in the Stormlight Archive, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about him at this point. I didn't like him when I read the first book. As I've moved further into the story, he started to grow on me a bit. So let me know what you think if you have a particular character that you like in those heroic arcs. So what's the next piece that makes this story feel epic? And for me, it's the idea of epic timescale and mythological connections. Stories that feel epic feel big because they deal with big, almost unseen forces. In The Wheel of Time, you have the dark forces, you have Randall Thor, you have the Aes Sedai, you have all sorts of mythological archetypes that are resolving their conflicts between themselves. In Lord of the Rings, you have Sauron, you have the elves, you have Frodo, you have the Ring, you have Gandalf, you have Saruman, you have all sorts of characters that are working with forces kind of beyond our understanding. Now, Sanderson's Stormlight Archive is one story where gods and the forces in the novel, they definitely feel big in scope, in mystical and concept. As Sanderson unfolds his story, we might learn more about those things, but for now, to me, it feels very opaque, and that can be a positive thing. And for me, myths that resonate tell truths without getting too specific. Supporting those themes may be elements of prophecy. In The Wheel of Time, Rand al'Thor is a prophesized savior that's coming about and emerging within the context of the story. I see similar themes unfolding in Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, and we'll see how those play out as he completes his work. Tying these things together for me in making stories feel epic and fantastical is the idea that the magic systems feel truly mythic, and they really try to get into things that are unknown. In The Wheel of Time, there's the One Power, and that shapes the idea of reality, and it serves as one of the central focal points for the conflict against the Dark One. In Stormlight Archive, there's the concept of surge binding, and that serves as a major focal point of the story with deep historical roots in the conflict set up throughout all of the novels. There's also the hints of divine power. In Stormlight Archive, you have the heralds that are circling around on the periphery of the story, and every time they're mentioned, I find myself personally drawn into the story because a glimpse of them is so rare that it really is meaningful. And then in the Song of Ice and Fire, you have the old gods and the Lord of Light that also draw me in the same type of way. For me, all of these things combine to make a story feel truly epic because they broaden the scope of the storytelling. I appreciate you taking a look at this. If you know somebody who wants to learn this, consider sharing this with them. If you found this positive or beneficial at all, consider dropping a like on it and let me know what questions I can answer. I'm Adam Scott for RPG Club. Thanks for watching.